known to be selfish and unsympathetic. They do not know how to love and respect one another. They argue and quarrel over trifling affairs, only to their own harm and suffering. And life becomes but a dreary round of unhappiness. Regardless of whether they are rich or poor, they worry about money, they suffer from poverty, and they suffer from wealth because their life are controlled by the greed. They are never contented, never satisfied. A wealthy man worries about his estate if he has one. He worries about his mansion and all other possessions. He worries lest some disaster befall him. His mansion burns down, robbers break in, kidnappers carry him off. Then he worries about debt and the disposition of his wealth. Indeed, his way to death is lonely, and nobody follows him to death. A poor man always suffers from insufficiency, and this serves to awaken endless desires for land, a house, being aflame with covetousness. He wears out both his body and mind and comes to death in the middle of his life. The whole world seems pitted against him, and even the path of death seems lonesome, as though he has a long journey to make and no friends to keep him company. Now there are five evils in the world. First, there is cruelty. Every creature, even insects, strive against one another. The strong attack the weak. The weak deceive the strong. Everywhere there is fighting and cruelty. Second, there is the lack of a clear demarcation between the rights of a father and son, between an elder brother and a younger, between a husband and wife, between a senior relative and a younger. On every occasion, each one desires to be the highest and the prophet of the others. They cheat each other. There is deception and a lack of sincerity. Third is the lack of a clear demarcation as to the behavior between men and women. Everyone at times has impure and lavishness thoughts and desires that lead them into questionable acts and often into disputes, fighting, injustice, and wickedness. Fourth, there is fourth, there is the tendency for people to disrespect the rights of others, to exaggerate their own importance at the expense of others, to set bad examples of behavior and being unjust in their speech, to deceive, slander, and abuse others. Fifth, there is this tendency for people to neglect their duties toward others. They think too much of their own comfort and their own desires. They forget the favors they have received and cause annoyance to others that often passes into great injustice. People should have more sympathy for one another. They should respect one another for their good traits and help one another in their difficulties. But instead, they are selfish and hard hearted. They despise one another for their failings and dislike one another for their advantages. These aversions generally grow worse with time and after a while become intolerable. These feelings of dislike do not soon end in acts of violence, yet they poison life with feelings of hatred and anger that become so deeply carved into the mind that people carry the marks into the cycle of reincarnation. Truly, in this world of lust, a person is born alone and dies alone, and there is no one to share one's punishment in the life after death. The law of cause and effect is universal. Each person must carry one's own burden of sin and must go alone into its retribution. The same law of cause and effect controls good deeds. A life of sympathy and kindness will result and good fortune and happiness. As years go by and people see how strongly they are bound by greed, habit, and suffering, they become very sad and discouraged. Often, in their discouragement, they quarrel with others and sink deeper into sin and give up trying to walk the true path. Often, their lives come to some untimely end in the very midst of their wickedness, and they suffer forever. This falling into discouragement because of one's misfortunes and suffering is the most unnatural and contrary to the law of heaven and earth, and therefore one will suffer both in this world and in the worlds after death. It is true that everything in this life is transitory and filled with uncertainty, but it is lamentable that anyone should ignore this fact and keep on trying to seek enjoyment and satisfaction of his desires. It is natural in the world of suffering for people to think and act selfishly and egotistically, and because of it, it is equally natural for suffering and unhappiness to follow. People favor themselves and neglect others. People let their own desires run into greed and lust and all manner of evil. Because of these, they must suffer endlessly. Time of luxury do not last long, but pass away very quickly. Nothing in this world can be enjoyed forever. Therefore, people should cast away while they are young, healthy, and all their greed and attachment to worldly affairs, and should seek earnestly for true enlightenment. For there can be no lasting reliance or happiness apart from enlightenment. Enlightenment. That's the path. Most people, however, disbelieve or ignore this law of cause and effect. They go on in their habits of greed and of selfishness, being oblivious of the fact that a good deed brings happiness and an evil deed brings misfortune. Nor do they really believe that one acts in this life condition, the following lives implicate others with regard to the rewards of punishments for their sins. They lament and cry about their sufferings entirely, misunderstanding the significance their present acts have upon their following lives and the relation their sufferings have to acts of their previous lives. They think only of the present desire and present sufferings. Nothing in the world is permanent or lasting. Everything is changing and momentary and unpredictable. But people are ignorant and selfish and are concerned only with the desires and sufferings of the past moment. They do not listen to the good teaching, nor do they try to understand them. They simply give themselves up to the present interest, to wealth and lust. From time, immoral and incalculable number of people have been born into this world of delusion and suffering, and they are still being born. It is fortunate, however, that the world has the Buddha's teaching and that people can believe in them and be helped. Therefore, people should think deeply, should keep their minds pure and bodies as well. They should keep away from greed and evil and should seek good. To us, fortunately, the knowledge of the Spirit teaching has come. We should seek to believe in them and wish to be born again, knowing God's teaching. We should not follow others into greedy and sinful ways, nor should we keep the Spirit teaching to ourselves alone, but should practice the teachings and pass them on to others.